Hello there. This is Daniel, and I am going to talk a little bit about Storm, where it is, and where I've been in terms of Magic. I honestly have not been playing it that much. I haven't played Modern in quite some time, but I've had an interest in it, and I've been watching the current metagame, and that's kind of where I stumbled upon here with Storm. Obviously, you might think because of where Storm is now, it might not be a great deck to play. And I don't think that's a bad assumption. It's definitely not an exceptional deck. It's got a lot of problems, not necessarily where the cards that it currently has are concerned, but where the metagame is the problem, and maybe some of the cards that were recently printed and probably will be in the metagame for quite some time. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of where things are, some of the cards that have been printed since I've stopped playing, which has been quite some time. I stopped playing probably a little bit after Modern Horizons 1. So yeah, I've missed a lot, but I have a good idea. I still keep my eye on the metagame, watch some streamers, and so I want to talk about some of those cards and the way where the metagame is in the context of Storm, and then also I'm going to talk a little bit about what my plans are moving forward and how I want to approach some things, because I would like to play some Storm, and I don't think there are a lot of people that are looking and hard dedicated on the Storm deck, especially since Caleb Scherer is no longer playing the deck, or at least not playing it more professionally or competitively. So I just want to talk about it. I pulled this up here. This is a more recent 5-0 list from a Modern League. It looks like this player here, FSST, who I am not familiar with, though, has kind of kept the ball rolling with some of these 5-0s. The list looks extremely stock. It's hardly deviated from where I saw it back in the day. There are a couple of important changes to a lot of the lists right now, and I will go ahead and talk about those, some of the cards that have become a staple since I started playing. And also to clarify, I have played a bit with the deck. I've got myself back and familiarized with the deck. I have some opinions on some of these cards, although they may not be very well formed because I have, just kind of started dipping my toes. I only have maybe 20 or so matches under my belt, and so but the way things are, I have a lot of some cards that I'd like to test and some changes that I'd like to personally try out. So let's talk about some of the new cards that are available for Storm that weren't available when I started playing. I think the most important one that's come out is Wish. I think it is something that slots right into the Storm deck and adds another really nice component. I think when I played, obviously surgical extraction was very big, and there was a risk of losing all of the ways that you win if you have your grape shot surgically extracted, or you're empty the warrens. You may not even have an avenue to win the game. Wish kind of mitigates that a little bit. Some of our win cons are in the sideboard. It allows us to have a card that is kind of, for a little extra mana, is a catch-all, almost do anything card, because we have a Past in Flames in the sideboard, we have a Grape Shot in the sideboard, Empty the Warrens are in the sideboard, and then obviously whatever sideboard cards are in the sideboard as well. So this seems like a great addition. I haven't, when I first played it, I was extremely excited about it. As I've continued playing it a little bit more, I'm a little less excited about it. I think that it tends to be exactly that, like kind of an just a more expensive version of a card that we want, and often in low resource games ends up being almost an unusable card, or a hard to use card. And so I think that this card is still very important. I think it will be in the main board, but I'm not as hot on it as I originally was when I started looking at it. I thought it was a great card. I still think it's a great card, but it's not as big of a game changer as you might think. So some of the others, consider is just like a strictly better opt in this space. It lets us put a card into our graveyard that fuels Past in Flames. It's just you're going to replace 4 ops for 4 considers if that's what you're playing. So definitely going to be a mainstay. Fiery Islet. I see a lot of lists running 1, and I think that's a pretty good number because often our lands are very important, and sacrificing a land for a card is not necessarily an exciting trade-off. So there are going to be cases where that's useful, and you're going to have a lot of lands, and I think that especially the way we sift through our deck, having just 1 Fiery Islet seems like the right number because it's just pretty rare that sacrificing a land is going to be what we want, but when it is, it'll be nice to have. Riverglide Pathway. It's a decent land. It is not painful and helps us get the mana we want. Our mana is not as it's not as good as you might expect from being a 2-color deck. Just because I think we need more red mana than you might expect, but then also there are plenty of times where we need to maximize blue mana. There are often times where you're going to need a dual land, something that's generating blue and then also afterward maybe generates red. There are situations where maybe you have 3 lands and there's you have a Goblin Electromancer and you maybe have a Riverglide Pathway that you've put down for blue, and then an island, and you have like a Steam Vents. And so if you have a Goblin Electromancer, you play that. Now you only have access to blue mana, and now you can't maybe play a Ritual, play Metamorphose, play something that would allow you to go off. So that's a risk. But I do think this is a good land. I think that it looks like a lot of people are playing maybe 1 or 2. Sometimes I've seen 4, but I definitely think it has a place. I'm probably going to go with 1 and move on from there. The next one is Selendi Vision. This is just a great versatile card. I don't think we want a ton of it because it is a tapped land, but it is, it's a basically weaker Peer Through Depths that can sometimes be played as a tapped land. I don't think we want a ton of those because that's going to slow us down, but it is fine as a 1 or 2 of. I think almost all lists run 2. I'll probably be playing 1 to start with because the more I played it, the more it just felt like it was, 2 versions of things that seemed too expensive or not the right place whenever we had it. So maybe that might change as I'm playing. Maybe I'm not prioritizing putting it down as a land whenever the opportunity arises. But I guess we'll see. I'm still going to have it in the deck. I will probably shift it down from 2 to a 1. So let's go ahead and talk about why Storm is not that exciting right now, because the list hasn't changed so much in the past 2 or 3 years it's been. But the metagame has changed a whole lot, namely from Modern Horizons and Modern Horizons 2. But Modern Horizons both printed some cards that are extremely good against Storm. And so these are cards that you're absolutely going to have to be worried about. These are some of the main hate cards that come to mind. So I think the biggest ones are Endurance and Force of Negation. Now, back when I was playing in 2019, 2018, if the opponent was tapped out, you could assume that you were in the clear to go ahead and just combo off, bar the exception of a Surgical Extraction. As long as you prepared for Surgical Extraction, you were usually all right. Now, that is not the case anymore thanks to Force of Negation and Endurance. Your graveyard is more likely to not be safe, and you are more likely to get your cards countered, your spells countered out of nowhere when the opponent doesn't have any mana up. So, got to constantly be prepared for this. That is a very problematic thing for Storm, and obviously cutting off the graveyard is not anything new. We've had to deal with Rest in Peace and Relic of Progenitus, stuff like that, Surgical Extraction again on a regular basis. But this makes it to where we could get surprised, which again, surgical extraction, it did to some extent also cause some kind of surprise removal of the graveyard, but endurance is in particular something that will really surprise you as you're going through some kind of comboing. Then there's Esper Sentinel as well. This is just card advantage for them while we are trying to assemble some good card advantage, or just play some regular spells that we need. So that's going to slow us down, and it's going to make it to where they're more likely to draw their hate cards. Flusterstorm, it goes without saying. I mean, it's just a counter spell that can also negate your combos off. I mean, yeah, they could counter a Grape Shot, but that's less likely what's going to actually be happening in these situations. What's more likely to happen is they're going to counter partway through some kind of important spell, and it will have, your storm count will already be decently high, and you just won't have enough to pay for it. They call it also, if you do a very quick, maybe an Empty the Warren's turn, this could stop that very quickly too. So we also have Sanctifier Invec. This is like another rest in peace for us that only hits our red cards, but our red cards are very, very important. So it is very close to just a rest in peace for us. Solitude is another just free spell that could completely remove your Baral or your Goblin Electromancer. It's kind of an unfortunate. Again, we've got a lot of new cards that just kind of will stop your combo with when the shields seem down for the opponent. So it's going to take a lot more tight play. And then Soul Guide Lantern, just, we have a lot of artifact-based graveyard hate. So yeah, these are ubiquitous. Endurance is extremely good. It's main deckable. It's like a very reasonable body that also is a free spell. And yeah, it's just very, very good. I think Endurance is, after Force of Negation, is hate card number one that's problematic. So what do we do about that? It makes it so that our game 2 and 3 are mostly like a mid-rangey slogfest. I mean, this is something that's not new. You can almost expect from a lot of these matchups that your graveyard is nearly off limits. You won't have access to your graveyard, and you have to amass cards in your hand to go off. And that is totally possible for Storm, to go ahead and have a really strong no graveyard series of spells that gets you there. But it needs to be the focus now. And how do we get there? That's a big thing. Is okay, so if we can't rely on our graveyard, or we need to be worried about somebody countering some of our important spells, what do we do? Well, the first one is that Flusterstorm, luckily, can be used in our advantage. We can, anytime anybody is casting a Flusterstorm, we can have a Flusterstorm as well to help counter that Flusterstorm. So this is a very important card, actually, I believe, and I will be running, I believe, 2 in the sideboard. I think it's been a very good payoff in the bit that I've tested with it. The other thing is we need card advantage spells. So the biggest one that was very commonly used is Pieces of the Puzzle. Pieces of the Puzzle is an extremely good card that does generate card advantage. It's one card or you pay one card and get 2 cards back. Now, obviously, Gifts Ungiven is similar to that. It costs an extra mana, and you're getting the worst 2 of the 4 cards that you give. So often, Gifts Ungiven comes out whenever the graveyard is under duress, because it is going to net you card advantage, but it's so slow. And it is not, you're getting 2 quote-unquote bad cards of 4 cards. So often that was the plan in games 2 and 3, is to bring in Pieces of the Puzzle. I think that Pieces of the Puzzle is still amazing, and but I do love more of those effects. And so what is a card that is similar to that, that generates card advantage, because we need card advantage if we're going to hold cards in our hand to go off later. Yeah, that's where I'm going to go to some of the cards that I'm thinking about playing. And just to show, here it is. Now, these are not necessarily cards that I'm playing. These are cards that have come up in terms of how to handle card advantage or gaining card advantage in games 2 and 3 when the graveyard is not accessible. And so, personally, I'll talk about the cards that I'm not terribly interested in, and those are going to be these latter two here, which is Galvanic Relay. Galvanic Relay, I'm not terribly excited about. It will take a lot of resources to actually make it very good. It doesn't guarantee that you will win on the next turn. It allows your opponent to have an entire turn to like prepare and make sure that they can do something about what you're going to do next turn. So personally, I'm not a fan of Galvanic Relay. The other one is Reckless Impulse. Now, I don't mind Reckless Impulse, but the thing is, this card is something that is not terribly good to play when you're not comboing off. So it's better to evaluate it and when you're thinking about, okay, I'm not in the middle of a combo. What if this is turn 2 or turn 3? What does Reckless Impulse do? What if you are at turn 2 or 3 and you cast Reckless Impulse and you get 2 rituals or something? It's just not going to be useful. It's not going to generate card advantage. You have to take care of, or you have to use those now. I just don't think Reckless Impulse, you need to evaluate it in the context of, I'm not currently comboing off, I'm just trying to generate card advantage. Reckless Impulse is probably not the thing that's going to actually generate a lot of card advantage. And in fact, there are risks of losing a card using it. So the final one is Expressive Iteration. Now, I have not seen a lot of people playing Expressive Iteration, and I've seen some people discussing it. People don't like the idea that it cannot be reduced. And personally, I think that this card, I've tested it a little bit, and it seems extremely good. I'm excited for it. This is a card that very, very regularly does generate a card advantage. You will get 2 cards for 1 on this. This is something that it's a card that's commonly like pieces of the puzzle used in on turn 3. You need to do it before you played a land. Maybe hit a land. Maybe hit something, any other card, and just put those in your hand. Play the land for the turn. I mean, this card has seemed very good in terms of the later parts, games 2 and 3, when we're just amassing resources. It's almost always, every time I've cast it, been 2 cards for 1 card. So I really like this. I'm surprised that nobody is really playing it that much. And who knows, it may change when I keep testing, that this might actually not be that great of a card. Again, I want to caveat that I haven't had a ton of experience playing the metagame right now, specifically with Storm, but I feel like some of these seem like they're very, very useful. And I could be wrong. It could turn out that these are not the right choices, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what is the right choice. Well, how can we make these things better? Another thing that I want to talk about a little bit are some of the cards that are more obscure. You would have to splash a color, but might be good overall. So these are the cards. Specifically, I know Silence is getting a little bit more attention right now because some of the players have been jamming Silence over something like Remand. Personally, I don't think that's a good idea, especially if you're thinking about hate cards. Now, obviously, Remand essentially beats Counter Magic, a Force of Negation. Honestly, when I look at this here, when I look at some of our hate cards, what does Silence beat? In this sense, obviously it's good against something like Cascade spells or something. There are more generic more reactive uses for silence, trying to slow other players down. But in terms of handling hate cards, which I think is the most important thing for Storm, is I think it hits some of the counter magic better. If you play silence, you're essentially saying the rest of my spells are uncounterable here. You either counter silence and have 2 counters, or you cannot counter my spells this turn. So it does handle Force of Negation, it handles Flusterstorm, it handles stuff like Counterspell. So that's pretty good. It's not a bad card in that sense. What I don't think it does is it doesn't help with amassing more cards to outplay the opponent's card advantage. So when it comes to Remand, the line of actually remanding your Grape Shot to cast the Grape Shot again, that line is very, very important in low resource situations where the graveyard is not available. So if that's the case, silence doesn't help in that sense. It could be that silence, in most scenarios, you are, playing it, slowing the opponent down, or you have to already be ready to combo in order for silence to be good. And I think that from what I've seen, typically, that's not the case. It's not what we're looking for, but I could be wrong here. Now, the next one is Teferi. I think Teferi answers a whole lot of these issues that we're having with some of these hate cards. Teferi essentially makes cards uncounterable. It handles all of any counterspell because the opponent can no longer cast counterspells in response to your spells. He also makes it to where if they have no longer cast Endurance on their turn, you are free to use the graveyard. He is insurance that you are actually using the graveyard. And then also he can remove hate spells like maybe a Rest in Peace or some kind of something else, whatever you might need. Now, I think more so than Silence even, Teferi Time Raveler is a potentially very strong card for Storm if we were to splash, because it just handles so many hate cards there. I mean, when I look at these, you will not get blown out by Endurance. You will not get blown out by any of the counter spells. I mean, Endurance can still remove your graveyard, but it can't remove it in response to maybe the Past in Flames. You can't get Solituded for your bear. Will not be Solituded when you least expect it. Teferi can remove Sanctifier Invect by bouncing them. Esper Sentinel is still going to be a problem. Soul Guide Lantern, again, you can bounce their lantern and force them to crack it, and then if they do crack it, now the coast is clear to go ahead and start comboing off. So I honestly think that Teferi Time Raveler may be a great splash here. I'm not going to do that just yet. I think it also there's a large cost to adding a third color, but yeah, he's on my radar. I think he's very good in some of the metagame right now. Veil of Summer is another one. I mean, Veil of Summer makes a lot of your spells uncounterable, and it draws a card. Honestly, I think it does a lot of what Silence does. So it can protect your bears, and then you're not down a card when you cast it. So honestly, I almost like Veil of Summer over Silence because there are just a lot of instances. Obviously, it doesn't handle Unholy Heat, but Silence doesn't handle Unholy Heat either. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm feeling right now in terms of where the deck is, and I will go ahead and show the Storm list that I'm going to mess with right now, and then talk a little bit about my plans. So here's kind of the list that I'm at right now, and these aren't a lot of changes to the deck, because obviously Storm is a deck that's very heavily set in stone. There's not a lot of wiggle room for it. Aren't a lot of changes here, with the exception of down 1 Selendi Vision, down 1 Wish, down 1 Remand, and then up 3 Expressive Iteration. And then the sideboard does look a little different here. But again, I really think Expressive Iteration is a good card. It might be that it belongs in the sideboard, or that we need the fourth pieces of the puzzle before we have the first Expressive Iteration. But again, I've been very impressed with it. I think that it seems really solid. And I spoke about Remand and why Remand is important. I think it's a very, very important card in resource light combos. So games 2 and 3, Remand seems pretty solid. I went down one wish instead of having two wishes. Wish, again, is something where I think it's very good. I think you definitely want the first wish before you have the second grape shot. And just giving game 1 access to your sideboard. Often you're not using... We don't have a lot of sideboard pieces. It does give you access in game 1 to maybe Echoing Truth if you really need it. Somehow they have a game 1 lock piece. They have some kind of rule of law effect. Well, actually, I take that back. Rule of law effects shut down Wish completely. So that wouldn't even be a useful scenario. But Wish, just having one Wish is fine. And then often I find myself siding out Wish in games 2 and 3. Just bring in the cards that you actually want and don't expect to wish them back in. This tends to be that Wish comes out oftentimes based on what deck we're playing against. Gifts Ungiven comes out, Pieces comes in, Empty the Warrens would come in. If we're expecting some counterspells, Flusterstorm comes in. And so again, this is extremely stock. I have not made many changes except for the Expressive Iteration. I still think it's very good. And I'll talk a little bit about my plans. So for me, I'm interested in playing the deck. And I think what would be fun is trying to tweak it and see if we can make it at least as good as it can get for the metagame. Obviously, this is not going to be an extremely good deck. It's just too hateable right now. And I think that ideally my goal would be something like obtaining a 5-0 in a modern league. I think I might be playing some leagues, testing things out, and seeing where we can get in terms of league. So I expect to be almost relearning the deck. I mean, obviously, I have got myself a little bit acquainted again with the deck, but it's a deck that, there are many lines and you can do some small mistakes that end up losing you the game. So I expect to not have the tightest play as I start, but learning as much as I can, and then eventually hopefully getting that goal sometime down the line of a 5-0 in a modern league. Now, this is something where I'm not that set on it. I'm going to take this extremely slowly. It's just something that's for fun, for when I'm feeling it. If people are interested in watching it, I might throw it up on my old YouTube channel. So it will be there for people who want to view it, and maybe just mostly for me to look at my my old streams. So that's the situation I with what's going on with me and how I'm going to approach these things. One other thing that I wanted to say is that Caleb Scherer had an old Storm blog where there was a lot of guides and talking about choices for the metagame, why you would play the cards you want to play, and how you would sideboard for some of the other for some of the decks. Honestly, this has not been updated since almost. It's been, I think it only got updated one time since I've left. So most of these are 2 and 3 years old. That being said, because the deck does not change that often. I mean, even looking at this list from 2019, it's not that dissimilar from the decks that are being played now. Because of that, these guides and some of the sideboarding guides are still completely relevant. And I still highly recommend reading about these and making the choices or why choices are made, and understanding why you play 4 Brawl and 4 Electromancer, or why sometimes you go down to 2 Electromancer. In what metagame is that right? Those are important things to know about. Caleb is an extremely competent and talented player, and moved the deck in the direction that it is right now almost solely on his own shoulders. So yeah, this stuff is still super relevant, and yeah, I'm going to be still using this heavily as a guide, even though it's fairly old. So yeah, that's where we're at, and I'll probably be posting some gameplay videos at some point. So look out for that. All right.